Imagine a shadowy network stretching across medieval Europe, its influence so vast it shaped economies, toppled kings, and rewrote the rules of power, yet its true workings remained hidden for centuries. This wasn't some secret society of spies or occultists, it was the Hanseatic League. We think of the Middle Ages as a time of castles and crusades, but behind the scenes, this alliance of merchants and cities operated with a cunning that would make modern corporations blush. They built wealth so immense it rivaled empires. They brokered deals in whispered meetings, their ledgers filled with secrets that could make or break nations. And yet, so much of their story has been buried until now. What if everything you've been taught about medieval trade is only half the truth? The Hanseatic League wasn't just about selling wool and grain. It was a masterclass in control, a web of alliances so intricate that even kings feared crossing them. Picture this: a single letter from a Hanseatic merchant could shut down entire ports, strangle a rival's economy, or spark a rebellion. They didn't just move goods, they moved fates, and the most shocking part, many of their tactics, blackmail, monopolies, even early forms of insider trading, feel eerily familiar today. This wasn't just business, it was power wrapped in the cloak of commerce. So why don't we hear more about their darker secrets? Because history is written by the winners, and the Hanseatic League made sure their victories stayed quiet. But today, we're pulling back the curtain. From buried records and long-forgotten ship logs, we've uncovered revelations that will change how you see this medieval giant. How they manipulated entire currencies, why their spies were as feared as their merchants, and the chilling reason some of their most explosive deals were never written down. This isn't just a story about trade routes and tariffs, it's about ambition, betrayal, and the hidden hands that shaped our world. Stick with me, because what you're about to discover will rewrite the ledger of history itself. The Hanseatic League's gleaming storehouses and bustling ports were just the visible face of their empire. Beneath the surface, they wielded a far darker weapon, a hidden armada of pirate ships, loyal not to any crown but to the League's bottom line. These weren't rogue mercenaries or freelance raiders. They were carefully recruited, strategically deployed, and handsomely rewarded to strike with precision. When a rival city's merchants grew too bold or a competitor's prices undercut Hanseatic goods, the contour letters would arrive, thin parchment bearing veiled threats. And if those warnings were ignored, the ships appeared like ghosts in the fog, burning warehouses, hijacking cargo, and leaving harbors in ruins. Take the Siege of Bergen in the late 1300s. Official records blame unknown raiders for the destruction of Norwegian fish markets, yet local traders whispered of Hanseatic colors glimpsed through the smoke. Afterward, the League's merchants magically secured exclusive fishing rights along the coast. Coincidence? Hardly. Their pirate fleet operated under a simple rule: never leave proof, but always leave a message. Even kings turned a blind eye, fearing their own supply chains might mysteriously vanish next. The economic toll was devastating. In the Baltic alone, shipping insurance rates tripled for vessels not flying the Hanseatic flag. Some independent captains joined the League just to avoid becoming targets, a protection racket on a continental scale. But perhaps the most chilling detail: many of these pirate captains retired as wealthy Hanseatic elders, their past scrubbed clean by guild record keepers, because in the League's world, violence wasn't crime. It was just business conducted by other means. But while the Hanseatic League's official ledgers boasted of wool, timber, and salt, their most profitable goods never appeared on paper. Beneath the veneer of legitimate trade, they orchestrated Europe's largest black market, a web of smuggled spices, forbidden weapons, and even stolen relics. The League didn't just tolerate this shadow economy, they perfected it. Their contour trading posts doubled as smuggling hubs, where clerks kept two sets of books, one for tax collectors and another for the goods that moved under moonlight. Cinnamon from the east, banned by the church as a sinful luxury. Hanseatic ships delivered it to nobles who paid triple the price for discretion, swords destined for rebel armies. League merchants ensured they vanished from inventories before reaching conflicted regions for a hefty fee. The scale was staggering. In Lübeck's secret warehouses, authorities once uncovered enough Venetian glass to bankrupt half of Italy, all stolen, all untraceable. But the real money lay in spices. When the Pope banned pepper from certain markets to punish disobedient rulers, the League's captains became the underworld's grocers. They bribed customs officials with sacks of cloves, then sold the rest at monopoly prices. A single cargo of smuggled saffron could buy a fleet of ships. And weapons, they played both sides of every war. Documents from Bruges reveal how Hanseatic merchants armed French and English forces simultaneously during the 100 Years' War, charging each kingdom a premium to keep their rivals' shipments lost at sea. What made this system untouchable? The League's greatest innovation: plausible deniability. Independent smugglers took the risks while Hanseatic bankers laundered the profits through legitimate loans. If caught, these frontmen faced execution, but the League's ledgers stayed clean. Even kings turned a blind eye because the League's black market funded their wars. When the Danish crown needed gold to suppress a rebellion, it was Hanseatic smuggler barons who advanced the money in exchange for tax exemptions on legal trade. A perfect circle of corruption. By the time authorities pieced together the scheme, the League had already rewritten the rules. Their greatest power wasn't controlling goods, it was controlling greed itself. Behind the Hanseatic League's glittering facade of silks and spices lay a far grimmer commodity: human lives. While history books highlight their trade in amber and furs, the League's darkest secret was their role as middlemen in Europe's medieval slave markets. From the Baltic to the Black Sea, their ships carried not just goods but captives, men, women, and children torn from Slavic lands, the Caucasus, and even as far as Central Asia. The routes were meticulously planned. Novgorod's markets served as collection hubs where prisoners of war and raided villagers were sorted like livestock. Cargo manifests listed them euphemistically as servants or indentured laborers, their true fates hidden in coded ledgers. The profits were staggering. A healthy young man could fetch the price of 3 barrels of premium French wine, while skilled artisans, blacksmiths, weavers commanded sums equivalent to a year's rent on a merchant's guild hall. But the League's brilliance lay in laundering these earnings. Slave revenues flowed into respectable ventures, funding warehouses in Bruges, underwriting loans to bishops, even building churches. By the time silver changed hands, its origins were untraceable. When the Teutonic Knights needed funds for their crusades, it was Hanseatic bankers who supplied the gold. No questions asked about the slave auctions that filled their coffers. Some of the most damning evidence comes from Visby, where a 14th century shipwreck revealed iron shackles alongside Hanseatic trade seals. And in Lübeck's archives, a clerk's casual notation speaks volumes: 12 units of Sarmatian inventory lost to storm. These weren't crates of wax or timber, they were people reduced to an accounting entry. The League's true innovation wasn't just trafficking humans, but making the trade disappear into the mundane machinery of commerce. By the time reformers raised objections, the money had already been sanctified as cathedral-stained glass or guildhall feasts. The ledgers told a story of piety and prosperity. The chains told another. The Hanseatic League's power didn't just come from ledgers and ships, it flowed from something far darker. Whispers in the alleyways of Bruges and Novgorod spoke of a shadowy branch within the guilds, a network of blades for hire known only as the Silent Hand. These weren't common cutthroats, they were craftsmen of death trained to eliminate threats with surgical precision. A rival merchant found floating in the Elbe. A tax collector who pushed too hard against Hanseatic privileges, dead from a sudden illness. Even kings weren't immune. When King Eric of Pomerania dared to challenge the League's control over Baltic trade, his closest advisor was stabbed 13 times in a Copenhagen brothel, the killers vanishing like smoke. The League's genius was in deniability. No order was ever written, no payment traced. Instead, a discreet conversation in a contour's back room, a heavy purse left on a wine barrel, and within weeks the problem would resolve itself. The assassins often posed as travelers or monks, their weapons hidden in rolled-up trade manifests. In Danzig, a weaver's guildmaster who'd threatened to break from the League was poisoned with tainted communion wine administered by a visiting friar who disappeared before dawn. The message was clear: cross the Hansa and even God's grace wouldn't save you. But the most chilling evidence lies in Lübeck's Book of Debts, a ledger so ordinary it escaped scrutiny for centuries. Between entries for rope and tar, clerks noted cryptic payments. To the Helsinger for night work or Strasbourg settlement, historians now believe these were coded payments for killings. The Helsinger likely referred to a legendary assassin who operated near Helsingør, while settlements mirrored the League's term for trade disputes. Only this time, disputes ended not with coin but a knife in the dark. What made the system terrifying wasn't just its brutality, but its bureaucracy. Murder had become just another line item in the ledger of empire, and then there were the disappearances. In 1524, a Hamburg senator investigating Hanseatic tax fraud vanished during a routine inspection of warehouse records. His body was never found, but 3 weeks later, his sealed ledgers reappeared on the mayor's desk, every compromising page neatly excised. The League didn't just remove people, they erased inconvenient truths. Even their own weren't safe. A contour secretary in Riga who kept a private journal of sensitive meetings was found hanged in his chambers. The official verdict: suicide, though the rope bore the distinct knotwork of a Hanseatic ship's rigging. A warning to others: loyalty wasn't just expected, it was enforced. By the time reformers began connecting the dots, the League had already sanitized its records. But the pattern was undeniable. Wherever Hanseatic power faced resistance, death followed, always untraceable, always convenient. Their greatest weapon wasn't gold or ships, but fear itself. And fear, as any merchant knows, is the currency that never depreciates. While the Hanseatic League ships carried legitimate goods by day, their vaults hid a weapon far more destructive than any sword, a river of counterfeit coins so expertly crafted they nearly collapsed entire kingdoms. This wasn't petty forgery, it was economic warfare on a scale Europe wouldn't see again until the age of industrial espionage. The League's mints produced near-perfect replicas of English nobles, Venetian ducats, and even papal florins, then flooded rival markets until confidence in those currencies evaporated. Take the Great Currency Crisis of 1438. Merchants in Flanders suddenly found their purses full of suspiciously lightweight French écus coins that rang true but wore down to reveal base metal beneath a whisper-thin veneer of silver. The culprit: Hanseatic silversmiths in Rostock, who'd mastered a technique called sandwich striking. They'd sandwich a sliver of precious metal between 2 layers of cheaper alloy, then stamp them with dyes stolen from official mints. The coins passed casual inspection, but when rubbed against touchstones, the medieval equivalent of a counterfeit test, they revealed their true nature. Within months, markets from Antwerp to Gdansk refused French coinage outright, paralyzing trade and forcing King Charles to recall his entire currency. But the League's real brilliance lay in timing. They'd release counterfeit waves just before tax seasons, ensuring the fakes concentrated in royal coffers. When kings tried to pay armies or settle debts with this tainted silver, their credibility crumbled. In Lübeck's archives, a smug notation from 1462 reveals the strategy. 30,000 Rhenish guilders delivered to Brandenburg, half weight as per arrangement. The arrangement, a bribe to Brandenburg's mint master, who looked the other way as Hanseatic agents swapped real tax revenue for debased copies. The long-term damage reshaped Europe's financial landscape. By the late 1400s, distrust in coinage birthed radical alternatives like the Wechselbrief, an early form of paper credit. Ironically, the League pioneered these too, positioning themselves as the honest brokers amidst the chaos they'd created. Their money changers became indispensable, their banks the only ones trusted to verify coin purity for a hefty fee, of course. It was the perfect racket: first break the system, then charge everyone for the repairs. Perhaps the most haunting evidence lies in a cache of counterfeit molds discovered beneath a Hanseatic warehouse in Bergen. Among the usual suspects, English groats, Burgundian crowns, archaeologists found something chilling: perfect copies of the Byzantine hyperpyron. This meant the League's reach extended beyond Europe, destabilizing economies they never even traded with, because true power isn't just controlling money, it's controlling the very idea of what money is. And in that game, the Hanseatic merchants wrote the rules, then burned the rulebook. Beneath the churning waves of the North Sea lies one of medieval Europe's most enduring mysteries: the lost city of Rungholt, a wealthy trading hub that vanished overnight in a catastrophic flood. Official histories call it a tragedy of nature, a storm surge swallowing a city whole. But whispers in coastal taverns tell another story: that the Hanseatic League didn't just profit from Rungholt's demise, they engineered it. The evidence is circumstantial but chilling. Rungholt wasn't just another port, it was a direct competitor, controlling access to Frisian wool and Baltic amber, routes the Hanseatic merchants coveted. Unlike League-controlled cities, Rungholt's traders refused to pay tolls or follow Hanseatic price fixing. Then, in January 1362, the Groot Mandrenk storm struck with unnatural precision. Survivors reported dikes bursting in sequence, not randomly, but as if targeting key warehouses and docks first. Even the storm's timing was suspicious. It hit at midnight during Rungholt's annual merchant assembly, when the city's leaders were all gathered in one vulnerable coastal hall. Divers studying the ruins made a grim discovery. Among the shattered timbers, they found sections of the dikes deliberately weakened, wooden supports rotted with lye, a chemical used in Hanseatic wool processing. More damning, Hanseatic ships were spotted leaving the area hours before the storm, their holds suspiciously empty of cargo but heavy with something else, perhaps bags of silver for the dike inspectors who conveniently vanished after the flood. The League's own records betray telling gaps. Lübeck's treasury logs show a massive withdrawal labeled "Storm Relief" just days before the disaster, and in the aftermath, Hanseatic merchants swiftly took over Rungholt's trade routes, their contracts citing divine vacancy as justification. But the most haunting clue lies in a letter from a Bremen priest buried in monastery archives. God's wrath alone does not explain why the waves spared every Hanseatic warehouse along that coast. Whether by sabotage or supernatural coincidence, the League's fingerprints are all over Rungholt's corpse, because in their world, competition wasn't just bad for business, it was a problem to be drowned. The Hanseatic League's greatest asset wasn't their ships or their silver, it was their eyes and ears. While kings relied on clumsy networks of heralds and scouts, the League built something far more sophisticated, a spy ring masquerading as a trade guild. Every merchant, every ship captain, even humble innkeepers near contour offices were potential informants, feeding whispers into a system that could turn gossip into geopolitical leverage. Take the case of the Teutonic Knights in 1420. As the order prepared to wage war on Poland, their commanders were baffled when Polish forces seemed to anticipate every move. What they didn't know, Hanseatic wine merchants touring Prussian castles had counted garrison supplies, noted troop movements, and relayed the numbers to Gdansk scribes through coded invoices. A seemingly innocent order for 20 barrels of Rhenish red might specify the thickness of a fortress wall, while a request for Flemish wool could hint at cavalry numbers. The League didn't just trade goods, they traded secrets, and business was booming. Their methods were brilliantly mundane. In London, Hanseatic traders used cloth samples to smuggle maps dye patterns marking troop positions along the Scottish border. Bruges lacemakers, many indebted to Hanseatic moneylenders, stitched coded messages into their designs. Even the League's famed beer halls doubled as listening posts. Drunk nobles boasting of tax policies or military plans would find their words neatly summarized in reports labeled market sentiment analysis. But the real masterpiece was their courier system. Ordinary trade carts carried hollow axles stuffed with sensitive documents, while Hanseatic ship captains used a code based on sail positions to signal approaching threats. When the Duke of Burgundy planned to arrest Hanseatic merchants for tax evasion in 1468, his own treasurer, a man deep in Hanseatic debt, tipped them off by accidentally spilling ink on a ledger page. Within hours, every League warehouse in Antwerp was stripped of incriminating records. The consequences were staggering. When the King of Denmark plotted to seize Hanseatic assets in 1390, his own court tailor, a League informant, sewed the royal seal's design into a shipment of linens bound for Lubeck. By the time the king's men arrived, the warehouses stood empty, their goods relocated based on that single stitchwork betrayal. What made this network terrifying wasn't its size, but its invisibility. Unlike royal spies who left trails of bribes and boasts, the League's informants were just businessmen doing business. Their reports vanished into the mundane machinery of commerce, a column of numbers here, a misplaced invoice there. And when the time came to act, they didn't need armies. A strategically leaked secret about a queen's infidelity or a prince's debts could topple thrones faster than any siege engine. Because in the Hanseatic world, information wasn't power, it was currency, and they minted it better than any king. Among the Hanseatic League's most ruthless tactics was one that struck at the heart of medieval daily life, their alleged poisoning of beer. This wasn't just sabotage, it was psychological warfare. Beer wasn't merely a drink in medieval Europe, it was a staple, safer than water, a currency of trust. And the League allegedly weaponized it. Surviving records from Hamburg in 1416 describe a sudden wave of spoiled shipments to rival cities like Bremen and Dortmund. Drinkers reported violent illness after consuming supposedly tainted barrels, while Hanseatic brewed ale remained mysteriously unaffected. Coincidence? Or calculated carnage? The scheme's genius lay in its deniability. No need for armies or blockades, just a whispered rumor of poison, and entire cities would refuse local brews overnight. In Lubeck's archives, a clerk's marginal note hints at the strategy. Advised Rostock partners to delay grain shipments to Bremen brewers until quality concerns resolved. The quality concerns, likely Hanseatic agents dumping bitter herbs like wormwood into competitors' vats, mimicking contamination. By the time brewers identified the sabotage, their reputations were ruined, and thirsty townsfolk turned to Hanseatic merchants whose prices conveniently doubled during the crisis. But the smoking gun lies in a 13th-century lawsuit from Goslar. A disgruntled former Hanseatic brewer testified under oath that he'd been paid to add sleeping salts to his own ale before selling his business to League interest. The case was dismissed when key witnesses vanished, but the pattern repeated across Germany. In Wismar, archaeologists even found barrels with trace residues of henbane, a toxic plant medieval texts warned could madden the drinker. The ultimate proof, Hanseatic beer halls flourished during these plague years of bad brew, as chroniclers called them. Their ledgers show a suspicious spike in sales to towns where local breweries collapsed shortly after mysterious health scares. And when cities tried to ban Hanseatic imports in protest, their grain shipments would mysteriously rot in transit, leaving them no choice but to drink and pay whatever the League demanded. Because true dominance isn't just controlling trade, it's ensuring every sip reminds your enemies who holds the cup. Beneath the cross-topped steeples of Hanseatic cities, another kind of devotion thrived, one that mingled candlelight with cowrie shells, psalm books with rune stones. While the League publicly championed Christianity, whispers persisted that some merchants kept older gods close, performing secret rites to ensure fair winds and full coffers. This wasn't mere superstition, it was a calculated fusion of faith and profit. Archaeologists digging beneath Lübeck's merchant houses found curious artifacts, silver crosses deliberately buried with pagan amulets, ledger books scrawled with Norse bind runes alongside Latin prayers. One 14th-century trader's diary describes a midnight ceremony on the autumn equinox, where participants anointed their ship's prows with a mixture of holy water and sacrificial animal blood, a chilling blend of sacrament and sorcery. The goal, to bind both Christ and Njörður to their ventures, hedging celestial bets. The most damning evidence comes from Bergen, where a cache of storm letters was discovered wedged between church foundation stones. These weren't ordinary pleas for divine protection. Written in a coded mix of Old Norse and Low German, they invoked Thor to break the masts of rivals while simultaneously donating generously to local monasteries. The duality was deliberate. Public piety bought social legitimacy, while hidden rituals tapped into deeper, older fears. When a competing merchant's fleet mysteriously foundered in calm seas, neighbors whispered of ill winds, but the Hanseatic survivors knew exactly which altar had been properly appeased. Even their trade practices echoed pagan bargaining. In Visby, merchants allegedly left ghost coins at crossroads, a pre-Christian tradition repurposed to ensure no competitor could outsell them. And in Tallinn's Guildhall, archivists found a hollow floorboard containing a mummified raven's claw wrapped in silk. Ravens, sacred to Odin, were believed to bring foresight. The claw's position directly beneath the treasurer's chair suggests someone wanted more than divine guidance. They wanted to see market shifts before they happened. What makes these rituals so unsettling isn't just their secrecy, but their effectiveness. Records show that the merchants who practiced them, like the infamous burnt Kirch of Cologne, consistently outperformed rivals, surviving storms and market crashes with eerie luck. Whether through divine favor or psychological warfare, their dual faith worked, because in the Hanseatic world, the real magic wasn't in the rituals themselves. It was in making everyone believe you had the gods in your ledger. While the Hanseatic League's ships carried silks and spices in their holds, their most controversial cargo was neither bought nor sold openly. Hidden beneath crates of salted herring and Baltic timber lay stolen saints' relics ripped from altars, smuggled across borders, and traded to the highest bidder like common market goods. This wasn't just theft, it was a calculated assault on medieval Europe's most sacred economy, the trade in divine power itself. Consider the case of Saint Olaf's missing finger. When the Norwegian king's remains were exhumed in the 1200s, his silver shrine contained every bone except the right index finger, the very digit said to have pointed pagans toward salvation. Yet within a decade, that same relic miraculously appeared in a Cologne cathedral, coincidentally, a city with deep Hanseatic ties. Church records claim it was a gift from an anonymous pious merchant, but a Lübeck ledger from the same period tells a different story. A single entry lists payment to a Norwegian sexton for nighttime tomb services, followed weeks later by a sale entry, one sanctified digit verified by notary. The price equivalent to 3 years' wages for a master mason. The League's methods were chillingly systematic. Scouts identified relics in vulnerable churches, those near political unrest or poor enough to lack armed guards. Then came the reliquary specialists, craftsmen who could dismantle ornate shrines without damaging their contents. Finally, the smugglers, Hanseatic couriers who hid fragments in hollowed-out wax seals or sewed slivers of bone into the hems of woolen cloaks. A Strasbourg bishop once raged about thieves who cut saints like cheeses. And he wasn't wrong. Some relics were literally sliced into pieces to maximize profits. But the real scandal lay in their buyers. The League didn't just sell to shady collectors, they supplied kings, cardinals, even popes. When Emperor Charles IV needed holy credibility for his new Prague cathedral, Hanseatic merchants procured no fewer than 14 verified apostle relics within months. Never mind that 6 were duplicate body parts. 3 St. Peter ribs surfaced in different cities that year. The League's solution, certificates from compliant monks declaring each fragment had miraculously multiplied. The most damning evidence came from a shipwreck off Gotland. Divers recovering a 14th century cog found the usual trade goods until they pried open a false-bottomed chest. Inside lay the mummified head of Saint Barbara, her skull still bearing traces of gold leaf from her original altar. Nestled beside it, a bill of sale to a Livonian knight with detailed instructions to boil the flesh away if verification is required. Perhaps the darkest twist was how the League laundered their holy contraband. They'd donate a portion of profits to churches, building stained glass windows depicting the very saints they'd dismembered. In Stralsund, a Hanseatic-funded chapel displays a stunning mural of St. Nicholas, whose stolen toe bone reportedly rests beneath its altar, purchased back from the same merchants who stole it. The perfect crime: first create the demand, then sell both the cure and the disease. Even the League's downfall couldn't stop the trade. When their warehouses were seized in the 1500s, inventories listed unidentified bone fragments among spoiled grain and moth-eaten fabrics. Only later did priests recognize them by the scent of myrrh still clinging to remains that should never have left their shrines, because for the Hanseatic merchants, no object was too sacred to commodify. Not even the bones of the holy. The Black Death's apocalyptic march across Europe may owe its terrifying speed to an unexpected culprit: the Hanseatic League's insatiable greed. While history blames rats and fleas for the plague's spread, newly uncovered port records reveal a more sinister vector: merchant ships sailing knowingly with holds full of contagion and corpses. In the spring of 1348, as corpses piled high in Crimean trading posts, Hanseatic captains made a ruthless calculation: quarantines meant lost profits. So they weighed anchor, their sails billowing not just with wind but with death itself. The evidence hides in plain sight. A Lübeck ledger from that fateful year lists payments to doctors for cargo inspections, except the dates prove these examinations occurred weeks after the ships had already unloaded. Even more damning, customs logs from Gdansk show Hanseatic vessels arriving with every crew member listed as paid in advance, a euphemism for sailors who'd never collect their wages because they were already dead below decks. The League's innovation wasn't just ignoring quarantines, it was systematically forging health certificates, bribing officials to stamp clean bills of lading for ships reeking of decay. But the real horror lies in the numbers. When researchers mapped the plague spread against Hanseatic trade routes, the correlation was undeniable. Cities with League contours suffered outbreaks an average of 22 days sooner than those without. In Bergen, where Hanseatic warehouses dominated the docks, the mortality rate hit 70%, nearly double that of inland villages. A surviving letter from a Rostock merchant to his brother chills with its casual cruelty: God will sort the living from the dead. Our task is to sort the silver from the dying. The ethical rot went deeper than mere profit. The League weaponized the disaster. When Scandinavian kings tried to blockade infected ports, Hanseatic lawyers invoked ancient trade charters to force harbors open. In one grotesque twist, they even repurposed plague corpses as bargaining chips, threatening to dump infected bodies into rival cities' water supplies unless tariffs were lifted. A 14th century Danish chronicle describes Hanseatic merchants selling protective amulets made from arsenic-soaked cloth, knowing full well the poison would fail, but not before the desperate paid triple the price. Yet the darkest revelation may be the League's aftermath profiteering. As the plague decimated Europe's workforce, Hanseatic ledgers show they hoarded grain shipments to artificially inflate prices. In Prussia, they bought orphaned estates for pennies on the mark, creating a land empire built on graves. their greatest crime wasn't spreading the plague, it was realizing before anyone else that tragedy could be monetized. Because while kings prayed and peasants died, the Hanseatic League did what it did best. They ran the numbers and found the arithmetic of death alarmingly favorable. Sailors crossing the Baltic at night still whisper of the phantom cogger, a spectral Hanseatic vessel with sails black as a moonless sky, its hull groaning with the weight of sins no living crew dares name. These aren't just campfire tales. Behind every ghost ship legend lies a real maritime tragedy the League worked desperately to erase. Take the disappearance of the Wismar's Pride in 1429. Official records claim it sank in a storm off Gotland, yet coastal villagers reported seeing its mastless wreck drifting silently into port weeks later, holds bursting with unopened cargo. When inspectors boarded, they found only one thing: the ship's ledger, its final entry reading "cargo secured per Lübeck instructions," the ink still wet. The League's motive for silencing these disasters was brutally practical. A sunken ship meant insurance claims, angry investors, and scrutiny, but a vanished one that could be quietly written off as delayed. In Rostock's archives, a clerk's marginal note exposes the scheme. For missing vessels, mark awaiting divine winds until families cease inquiry. And when victims' kin pressed too hard, the contours had a solution. A widow in Stralsund demanding answers about her husband's disappearance received his waterlogged belt pouch delivered anonymously, stuffed with enough silver to buy her silence. The message was clear: some truths stay buried beneath the waves. The most chilling case is the Black Angel of 1384. Multiple merchant logs describe encountering this drifting hulk near Bornholm, its decks empty but for a single figure in Hanseatic merchant robes, allegedly pointing toward hidden reefs. When fishermen boarded, they found holds packed with human remains, not drowned sailors, but skeletons shackled ankle to ankle. The League dismissed it as drunken fantasy, but divers recently located a wreck matching its description. The cargo, iron slave chains fused by saltwater into a single grotesque mass. Coincidence unlikely, because for the Hanseatic merchants, ghost stories weren't folklore. They were damage control. Perhaps the darkest proof lies in Lübeck's tied book, an otherwise mundane record of harbor fees. Between entries for salt and timber, clerks noted mysterious payments to songkeepers, traveling bards paid to weave tragic ballads about doomed ships. These weren't entertainments, they were strategic distractions, romanticizing tragedies to obscure patterns. When 3 Hamburg vessels vanished near Rügen in 1511, the League commissioned a catchy shanty about the mermaid's curse. Soon, no one questioned why all 3 ships had been carrying witnesses to a duke's assassination. After all, everyone knew the real culprit was supernatural. The ultimate irony: these manufactured legends took on a life of their own. Modern radar sometimes picks up phantom echoes of Hanseatic hulls in the Baltic's deep channels, exactly where the League's own maps warned of dangerous currents they'd concealed from rivals. The ghosts still sail, not because they're supernatural, but because the truth was too damning to let surface. And in the end, the League's cover-ups became their most enduring legacy, a fleet of lies forever adrift between history and nightmare. Buried in the musty archives of Malbork Castle lies a document so explosive, it rewrites everything we thought we knew about medieval power struggles. On the surface, the Teutonic Knights and the Hanseatic League appeared to be separate forces, one a holy order of warrior monks, the other a network of profit-driven merchants. But a recently uncovered oath scroll from 1387 proves they were secretly 2 blades in the same sheath. Written in cipher on what appears to be a routine trade agreement, the true text emerges when held to candlelight, a blood pact to purge the Baltic of false merchants and faithless men. The terms were chillingly specific. The Knights would provide military muscle to eliminate trade rivals, while the League financed their crusades with interest rates lower than any king could secure. Together, they created a feedback loop of terror and profit. When Prussian cities rebelled against the knights' heavy taxes in 1402, Hanseatic merchants suddenly discovered evidence linking rebel leaders to witchcraft. Within weeks, those men swung from gallows outside Marienburg, their warehouses conveniently auctioned off to League loyalists. The knights got obedience, the Hanseatic got prime real estate. Even the executions served dual purposes. The hemp for the nooses came from League-controlled Riga, sold to the Teutonic treasury at a 600% markup. But the Pact's true genius lay in its deniability. Official correspondence spoke vaguely of spiritual and mercantile cooperation. The real agreements were etched in disappearing ink on animal skin prayer scrolls visible only when brushed with sacramental wine. A ledger from Tallinn's contour records payments for clerical supplies that precisely match the knights' campaign dates against Lithuanian pagans. And when the Pope sent investigators to probe rumors of unholy alliances, they found nothing but pious donations. Funded by mysterious grain speculations that always coincided with Teutonic victories, the darkest evidence comes from Visby's catacombs, where workers restoring a collapsed wall found a hidden chamber in 2018. Inside lay 18 skeletons in merchant tunics, their skulls crushed by distinctively Teutonic mace wounds. Beneath them, a chest of Hanseatic trade seals and a ledger page listing the dead as delinquent accounts settled per Rigel Roman 12. Rigel Roman 12 was the code name for the Knights Grand Master during the 1423 purge of Gotland's independent traders. The numbers told the story. 18 executions, 18 new Hanseatic trading posts established that same winter. This wasn't just an alliance, it was a joint venture in conquest. The knights provided the righteous pretext, the League supplied the financial infrastructure, and together they turned the Baltic into a private fiefdom. When the Lithuanian Grand Duke begged the Vatican to intervene, his letters accused them of creating a new Rome where the cross and coin are one. He wasn't wrong. In the end, even the Church turned a blind eye because every time a Teutonic raid filled the League's coffers, a tenth of the plunder miraculously found its way to Rome. Marked in the ledgers simply as tithe for spiritual guidance, the Pact's unraveling came not from external pressure, but from the same greed that birthed it. In 1466, the knights seized a Hanseatic silver shipment bound for Poland, claiming it was tainted by heresy. The League retaliated by cutting off their grain supply during a crucial siege. Like two scorpions in a bottle, their perfect system collapsed when each realized the other held too many secrets. But by then, the damage was done. Entire generations had lived and died under their invisible yoke, never knowing the true architects of their suffering were not kings or popes, but a handshake in the dark between men who traded salvation like salted fish. Deep in the vaults of a Lübeck counting house, crates of raw amber glowed like captured sunlight until the night a Hanseatic clerk reportedly saw the gems bleed. This was no ordinary treasure. According to ship logs from 1353, the amber came from a sacked Lithuanian shrine, where priests had warned it was consecrated to the wrong dead. The League dismissed such superstitions until the deaths began. First went Captain Jurgen of the White Gull, who bragged about melting the amber into prayer beads. His body washed ashore near Danzig, the skin peeled back in unnatural spirals. Yet his cargo hold was found empty, not a single golden shard remaining. Then came the contour fire of 1356, where flames allegedly leaped sideways to consume only ledgers recording the amber's sale. Even skeptics shuddered when a Bremen merchant, who'd pocketed a particularly large chunk, was found suffocated, his lungs filled with what the coroner called a pollen-like dust, though it was winter. The curse's path can be traced like a plague. In Visby, a tavern keeper who accepted amber as payment woke to find his strongbox bursting with dead bees, their wings fused to the gems. A Gdansk goldsmith who set the stones into a duke's crown later hanged himself, his note claiming the amber whispered at night, By the time the pieces reached Venice, the League's agents took drastic measures. One bill of sale states the final lot was sealed in lead with wax thrice blessed before being dumped into the Adriatic. Yet fishermen that season hauled up nets glittering with telltale shards, their catches rotting before reaching port. What makes this more than fireside folklore? The timing. Each tragedy coincided with lunar eclipses, a pattern even Hanseatic accountants noted. Marginalia in a Rostock ledger advises keeping solstice accounts separate from Prussic amber, while a Riga priest's diary describes performing an exorcism on a merchant who swore the gems grew warmer during storms. The hoard's final insult came in 1401 when a Lübeck guildmaster tried donating the remaining pieces to a church. The night before consecration, every stained glass window depicting saints shattered, except one, Lazarus, his raised hand now holding a suspiciously amber-colored orb. The League's solution: they sold the miracle window to a French bishop for enough silver to buy 3 ships, because even curses, it seemed, could be commodified. Today, divers still report odd glints near the Adriatic's depths, but local sailors throw salt overboard when they pass. Some say it's mere tradition. Others know better, because true curses aren't broken, they're just resold. Far beyond the bustling ports of the North Sea, where icebergs groan like living things and the midnight sun casts eerie shadows, lie the skeletal remains of settlements that defy history's official record. The Hanseatic League's reach didn't stop at the Baltic. It stretched into the Arctic's frozen embrace, where colonies rose and fell in silence. In Greenland's wind-scoured fjords, stone foundations huddled beneath lichen-cloaked ruins, their proportions too precise for Inuit builders. These aren't Viking longhouses, they're Hanseatic warehouses, their floors still littered with German pottery shards and brass weights stamped with Lübeck's twin-towered seal. The mystery isn't just their existence, it's their sudden abandonment. Icelandic sagas tell of foreign traders who built in the north, then vanished between winters, leaving hearths cold and storage pits full of spoiled rye. Climate scholars point to the Little Ice Age's encroaching frosts, but the timelines don't align. Hanseatic records show shipments to Nordersätter, their name for Arctic outposts, continued decades after temperatures dropped, with one 1420 ledger boasting of 7 ships heavy with walrus ivory and night fur. Night fur, that cryptic phrase appears repeatedly, always untethered to any known animal. Excavations near Disco Bay revealed piles of severed walrus tusks, each scored with notches matching League accounting symbols, and beside them, human remains bearing cut marks inconsistent with Inuit hunting practices. Conflict theories gain credence when examining weapon caches. A 2018 dig in Iceland's Westfjords uncovered a mass grave beneath what was once a Hanseatic trading post. The bodies, 23 men, women, and children, were buried with Hanseatic pewter spoons clutched in their hands, yet their skulls showed fractures from distinctly non-European weapons. Carbon dating places their deaths around 1450, coinciding with a curious gap in Lübeck's northern expeditions' expense logs. That same year, a contour clerk scrawled in the margin of a ledger, "God forgive us the Greenland reckoning." But the smoking gun lies in the League's own maps. The famed Vinland chart, long dismissed as fantasy, was recently proven authentic through pigment analysis. It shows Hanseatic settlements dotting Greenland's coast with one chilling annotation near a cluster of unnamed islands. Here be the Metal Eaters. Inuit oral history describes pale men who feared the darkening sky, abandoning their stone towers after the ground grew hungry. Modern soil tests at these sites reveal abnormal lead concentrations, hinting at early smelting attempts. Perhaps the League wasn't just hunting ivory, they were mining something far more valuable and far more dangerous. The ultimate irony: these colonies may have fallen not to ice or conflict, but to the League's own ruthlessness. A 1460 letter from a Bergen bishop complains of Hanseatic ships refusing to evacuate starving settlers unless they signed debt contracts for transport fees. Those who couldn't pay were left to the long Arctic night, their final breaths etching frost across abandoned ledgers. Today, satellite imagery shows unnatural straight lines beneath Greenland's thawing permafrost, the ghostly footprints of warehouses built to exploit a land even the League couldn't conquer. Because greed, unlike men, doesn't freeze, it simply waits. History remembers the Hanseatic League as a brotherhood of merchants, where power flowed through bearded men in fur-lined cloaks. But beneath the wax seals and iron chains of trade agreements, another story whispers one of a woman who bent the League's rules without breaking them, only to be scraped from the records like old ink from parchment. Her name was Margaret von Buxhoeveden, and for 17 years in the late 1400s she ruled Rival, modern Tallinn, not by title but by sheer, unassailable influence. The clues to her reign are scattered like breadcrumbs through banned city chronicles and the personal diaries of rivals. A Danzig merchant's furious letter to his brother complains of the widow's tax, a mysterious surcharge imposed on Baltic timber shipments cross-referenced with Rival's treasury logs showing a sudden spike in harbour repairs funded by that very levy. A Lübeck bishop's correspondence whines about being denied docking rights unless his sermons praised certain unchristian mercantile policies, a nod to Margaret's rumoured hold over the clergy. Even the architecture whispers her legacy. The Guildhall's once plain facade gained ornate carvings of vines and foxes during her era, symbols long associated with cunning and growth in Hanseatic craft traditions. How did a woman wield such power in an all-male system? Margaret's husband, the official burgomaster, died suspiciously after signing over full control of their trading fleet to her. Guild minutes from that year note his passing as God's will, followed immediately by a motion to allow households of bereavement to maintain existing trade contracts, a loophole tailor-made for her. For years, she operated through proxies, a deaf-mute clerk who delivered her orders in sign language, a disgraced knight-turned-enforcer who answered only to her. When the Livonian order demanded Rival provide troops for a crusade, Margaret sent 50 men, along with invoices charging for their armor and rations at triple the market rate. The knights paid without protest, but her crowning maneuver was the Silk Siege of 1483. When the League banned Rival from trading Russian furs directly, Margaret quietly bought up every bolt of Florentine silk in northern Europe, then had it smuggled into Novgorod. The resulting scarcity drove silk prices so high that Hanseatic elders were forced to negotiate through her for access to the fur routes again. The official treaty makes no mention of her, crediting instead the wise merchants of Rival. Yet a fragment of her household ledger survives, listing a payment for 6 scribes to amend the city books that same week. The erasure was deliberate. After her death, the guild ordered all portraits in the Rathaus burned, replacing them with generic landscapes. A visiting notary's diary from 1504 describes seeing workers whitewashing over a mural of a grey-haired woman holding scales and ships. But Margaret left one lasting jab at her detractors. The spire of Rival's Ulvist church, rebuilt under her patronage, stands exactly 1 Hanseatic foot taller than Lübeck's Marienkirche, a silent middle finger in brick and mortar. Because true power isn't always in the records, sometimes it's in the gaps between them. Venice's golden age was built on silks and spices until the Hanseatic League decided to rewrite the rules of Mediterranean trade with the subtlety of a dagger between the ribs. On the surface, these two mercantile giants coexisted peacefully, their ships passing like courteous strangers in busy harbors. But beneath the veneer of diplomacy, the League waged a quiet war of economic sabotage so brutal, it left La Serenissima bleeding silver into the Adriatic. It began with the salt. Venice's wealth sprang from its control of this precious commodity, used to preserve fish and flavor nobles' tables across Europe. The League's first strike: flood the market with cheaper Baltic salt, harvested from pans along the Lubeck coast. Venetian merchants scoffed at first. Their Mediterranean salt was finer, whiter, more prestigious. But the League played the long game. They sold their salt at a loss, undercutting Venice's prices until German fishmongers and French cheesemakers switched suppliers. By the time Venice realized the trap, their warehouses were overflowing with unsold inventory, and the League's agents had already locked in exclusive contracts with key buyers. Then came the spice gambit. The League couldn't match Venice's direct access to eastern trade routes, so they found another way: smuggling. Through their Novgorod outposts, they funneled black market pepper and cinnamon from overland Silk Road caravans, bypassing Venetian-controlled ports entirely. A ledger from 1482 reveals the scale. A single Hanseatic merchant in Riga handled more illicit saffron than the official Venetian customs records for that entire year. The spices were inferior, dusty and stale from the long journey, but the League's clients didn't care. They were paying half the price, but the real masterstroke was the League's manipulation of shipbuilding. Venice's arsenal was the envy of Europe, capable of producing a galley in a single day. The League couldn't compete, so they sabotaged. Hanseatic agents infiltrated Venetian rope walks and bought up entire flax harvests in Burgundy, creating a shortage that delayed fleet construction for months. When Venetian merchants tried to pivot to Baltic hemp, they found the League had already cornered that market too, and mysteriously, shipments to Venice kept sinking in storms. A surviving letter from a Hanseatic captain to his brother brags: "Let the Venetians build their pretty ships, they'll float just long enough to feed the fish." The final insult: the League's covert support of Venice's enemies. When the Ottoman Empire besieged Venetian outposts in the 1500s, Hanseatic merchants were caught selling iron and timber to both sides, but always ensuring the Ottomans got the better quality at lower prices. A ledger from Hamburg's archives shows a single shipment of Swedish cannon-grade iron sold to Istanbul for 30% less than Venice paid for inferior stock. The reason: a handwritten note to keep the lion's claws blunt. By the time Venice grasped the full extent of the sabotage, it was too late. Their trade empire had been nibbled to the bone, not by a single devastating blow, but by 1,000 calculated cuts. The League's brilliance lay in making each move just deniable enough. No declarations of war, no blockades, just business, conducted with a smile and a ledger full of poison. And perhaps the cruelest twist: when Venice finally collapsed under Ottoman pressure, it was Hanseatic bankers who swooped in to buy their remaining assets at a 90% discount. Because in the League's world, friendship was just another commodity and betrayal the highest form of commerce. In the shadowy back rooms of Hanseatic trading posts, amid the clink of silver and the scratch of quills, another sound occasionally echoed: the whispered promise of alchemy. The League didn't just trade gold, they manufactured it. Or rather, they convinced Europe's nobility they could. By the mid-1400s, a curious pattern emerged across royal courts. Charlatans claiming to transmute base metals into gold always seemed to arrive aboard Hanseatic ships, their pockets lined with introductions from League-affiliated merchants. These weren't rogue opportunists, they were chess pieces in a calculated con that blurred the line between fraud and financial warfare. Take the case of Master Heinrich of Lubeck, a supposed alchemical prodigy who dazzled the Duke of Pomerania with ingots of new gold in 1472. Contemporary accounts describe the metal as suspiciously light, yet it passed every test because the League had bribed the Duke's assayer to dilute touchstone acids. Heinrich's real genius: his gold wasn't fake, just temporarily valuable. Chemical analysis of surviving samples reveals an alloy of copper and electrum, designed to last just long enough for the League's moneylenders to secure loans against it. By the time the metal tarnished, the Duke owed interest on a fortune that never existed. The scheme's beauty lay in its layered deception. While alchemists like Heinrich performed for patrons, Hanseatic agents quietly shorted the local currency, knowing the sudden influx of gold would trigger inflation. In Rostock's archives, a ledger from 1485 exposes the playbook. Entries show loans issued in unstable currencies just before an alchemist's discovery, then called in after hyperinflation made repayment impossible. The result, nobles surrendered land and trade privileges to cover debts, assets the League swiftly absorbed. But the most brazen twist came when the League sold the same alchemical secrets multiple times. A cipher in a Bruges merchant's diary details how they recycled an Italian's transmutation manuscript through 3 different courts, altering the ink and seals each time. When 2 buyers compared notes, a Hanseatic envoy smoothed things over by blaming counterfeiters and selling them both an authenticated revised edition for triple the price. The fallout was catastrophic. Some principalities saw their economies collapse entirely, like the county of Oldenburg in 1491, where the sudden devaluation of coinage sparked bread riots. Yet the League always emerged unscathed. Their alchemists conveniently vanished often onto Hanseatic ships bound for new marks, while their bankers offered stabilization loans at ruinous rates. By the time a papal bull condemned alchemical fraud in 1505, the damage was done. The League had turned lead into gold after all, not through magic but by transmuting greed into dominion. And the cruelest joke, many of their victims kept digging for the real secret, convinced they'd simply misapplied the formula, because the true alchemy was psychological. Once someone believes in easy gold, they'll bankrupt themselves chasing it forever. Beneath the icy waves of the Baltic, where darkness swallows the light and centuries dissolve into silence, lie the forgotten vaults of the Hanseatic League, ship after ship crammed with riches that never reached port. These weren't accidental losses, they were open wounds in the League's ledger, carefully excised from official records but whispered about in taverns from Bergen to Bruges. Take the Golden Swan, a 14th century cog that vanished en route from Novgorod with a hold packed with church silver and Arctic furs. Contemporary chronicles blamed storms, but the ship's recovered manifest tells a different story. Scribbled in the margin beside its cargo of walrus tusks, to be offloaded at Visby per private accord. That private accord likely involved smuggling the goods tax-free, until someone decided sinking the evidence was more profitable than sharing. Modern treasure hunters call these wrecks floating ledgers, each one a snapshot of the League's shadow economy. In 2015, divers probing the Øresund Strait found the Lübecker Frau, her hull remarkably intact. Inside, they uncovered not just the expected barrels of herring and wax, but something far more damning: 22 chests of counterfeit English nobles, still nestled beneath the captain's bunk. The coins were so expertly forged, numismatists initially declared them genuine until X-rays revealed their hollow cores filled with cheap tin. This wasn't just lost cargo. This was a smoking gun, proof the League's currency sabotage extended beyond land into deliberate maritime fraud. But the real battles begin when these wrecks surface. In 2018, a Polish salvage team located the Schwarz Adler off Gotland, its hold brimming with amber and silver. Within hours, Germany, Sweden, and Poland all laid claim, not to the artifacts but to the legal precedent they set. Because Hanseatic wrecks occupy a gray zone in maritime law, were they private merchant vessels or extensions of city-states, a Dutch court's ruling on the Schwarz Adler set a chilling precedent, declaring the wreck a corporate asset of the Hanseatic League's successor entities, effectively handing control to modern German shipping conglomerates. Local fishermen whose ancestors may have died on those ships get nothing. The most contentious case, the Himmelskron, a legendary treasure ship that went down in 1499 carrying 3 tons of Bohemian gold. When an Estonian expedition pinpointed its wreck in 2021, they found the gold gone but discovered something far more valuable: Nestled in the silt were the captain's logs, detailing how the gold was never meant for Lübeck. It was a bribe from Hungarian nobles to the Teutonic Knights, proof the League was skimming Crusader funds. The Knights' modern successors, now a Catholic charity, immediately sued to claim the documents as sacred relics. The League's descendants countersued, arguing the logs were commercial records. Meanwhile, the Estonians watched helplessly as their find became a tug of war between powers that hadn't existed for centuries. Perhaps the cruelest twist lies in the artifacts themselves. Many recovered treasures bear the marks of forced labor gouges from shackled hands on silver ingots, runic curses etched into amber by captive Baltic pagans. Museums proudly display these objects as Hanseatic cultural heritage, but their labels rarely mention the bloodstains still detectable under UV light. Because the League's greatest trick wasn't just sinking their secrets, it was ensuring that when the sea finally gave them back, the world would admire the gold and ignore the chains. Hidden in the locked chests of former Hanseatic merchants, beneath layers of moth-eaten wool and counterfeit coin molds, lie manuscripts so dangerous they were never meant to see daylight. These weren't just trade records or ledgers, they were philosophical grenades, packed with ideas that could have shattered medieval Europe's religious order. The League's public face was one of pious conformity, their ships flying crosses and their guild halls hosting masses, but their private libraries told another story. Take the so-called Lübeck heresies, a series of treatises discovered walled up in a 14th century warehouse during renovations in 2012. Written in cipher on vellum disguised as cargo manifests, these texts dared to question transubstantiation, the very heart of Catholic doctrine, arguing that the Eucharist was merely symbolic. More shocking, they were penned by a Hanseatic accountant turned radical theologian who calculated Christ's divinity like a profit margin. If wine becomes blood, where goes the cost of shipping? For matter cannot vanish, only be resold. The League's motivation wasn't spiritual rebellion, it was cold economics. Church tithes and papal taxes drained their profits, and these clandestine texts proposed alternatives. One fragment, carbon-dated to 1398, outlines a merchant's reformation decades before Luther, a call to replace bishops with elected guildmasters and fund clergy like ship crews, paid by voyage, not eternal indolence. Another, smuggled inside a hollowed-out barrel stave from Riga, reimagined heaven as a free trade zone where souls accrued grace interest based on earthly productivity. The most explosive, a missing leaf from the Tallinn Contour archives referenced in a bishop's condemnation, allegedly claimed the Holy Spirit moved like market winds unbound by Rome's tariffs. But the League's real genius lay in distribution. They didn't circulate these texts openly, they weaponized selective leaks. When the Pope pressured Hanseatic cities to fund crusades, anonymous packages would appear in university towns containing meticulously forged church decrees stating merchants were exempt from holy wars. The ruse worked for years because the League's scribes replicated papal seals with chilling accuracy, even embedding threads from genuine Vatican documents into the paper. A 1453 letter from a Cologne inquisitor fumes about confiscating a chest of these fakes, only to find the courier had already sold copies to half the faculty at Heidelberg. The backlash when it came was brutal. In 1481, a Hanseatic scribe named Klaus van der Hoven was burned in Strasbourg not for heresy, but for ink crimes, a charge invented specifically for League dissenters. His trial records reveal the Church's fury. He'd been altering missals shipped to Baltic parishes, subtly changing prayers to bless fair winds and fair wages alongside saints. Yet even repression couldn't stamp out the ideas. A surviving notebook from a Rostock priest confesses his terror upon finding his own cathedral's liturgy contaminated. Someone had swapped the Latin panem nostrum, our bread, with negotium nostrum, our business, in every Eucharist manual. The ultimate irony, many of these radical texts survived not despite the League's secrecy, but because of it. When Lübeck's guilds purged their libraries in 1520 to appease the Reformation's early fires, they didn't burn the manuscripts, they repurposed them. X-rays of a church choir bench in Wismar revealed layers of heresy tracts glued beneath gilt leather, their words silenced but preserved, because the Hanseatic merchants understood something the church didn't. Dangerous ideas like contraband gain value when hidden. And in the right market, even blasphemy has its price. When crops failed and stomachs growled across medieval Europe, the Hanseatic League didn't just profit from hunger, they engineered it. While chroniclers lamented God's punishment during the great famines of the 1400s, League merchants were quietly executing a scheme so ruthless it turned empty bellies into balance sheets. Hidden in Lübeck's archives lies a ledger from 1482 that should have been burned, a single page titled Dearth Adjustments, where scribes calculated exactly how many grain shipments to withhold from each starving region to maximize prices. The numbers are clinical. Bremen's reserves cut by 40% during a rye blight. Flanders' warehouses accidentally locked during the worst wheat shortage in memory. One chilling entry notes the optimal famine profit margin. 3 weeks of scarcity doubles value, 5 weeks triples beyond risk's revolt. The mechanics were diabolical in their simplicity. Hanseatic factors would spread rumors of crop failures in unaffected regions, sparking panic buying. Then came the ghost convoys, grain ships that sailed in circles off the Baltic coast, their holds full, waiting for prices to spike before docking. A captain's log from the White Falcon in 1491 admits to dumping 20 tons of barley overboard rather than sell at premature rates, while starving Danes rioted over bread prices in Copenhagen. The League's brilliance lay in their plausible deniability. When authorities in Gdansk demanded answers for empty granaries, merchants produced falsified mildew infestation certificates signed by bribed inspectors. In Bruges, they blamed unseasonable rains for delayed shipments, though weather records show that spring was unusually dry. But the smoking gun emerged in 2019 when historians cross-referenced Hanseatic tax records with monastic harvest accounts. The discrepancies were staggering. In years the League claimed poor yields, monasteries just miles away reported bumper crops. A Cistercian abbot's diary from 1477 rages about Hanseatic buyers purchasing his entire wheat harvest only for it to vanish into sealed warehouses while nearby villages ate bark bread. Even more damning, the League's own charity was a weapon. They'd donate just enough grain to prevent revolt, then use the publicity to secure tax breaks. A Rostock ledger boasts how feeding 5,000 starving peasants with moldy barley earned them a 10-year harbor fee waiver, a savings worth 40 times the cost of the rotten handout. The cruelest twist, they manipulated time itself. By controlling grain mills, Hanseatic agents could artificially slow production during shortages. A lawsuit in Hamburg revealed millers were paid extra to lose grinding stones or discover sudden mechanical faults, delays that squeezed prices higher with each passing day. When Saxon nobles protested, the League's lawyers invoked ancient trade charters guaranteeing processing discretion. By the time mills resumed work, half the hungry had already pawned their tools for food, becoming permanent debt laborers on Hanseatic-controlled farms. This wasn't just profiteering, it was social engineering. Famine created two enduring assets for the League: desperate workers willing to accept slave wages and landholders forced to sell estates to buy food. Their ledgers from the Great Hunger of 1494 show a suspicious surge in property acquisitions, always coinciding with local bread riots. In Riga, they acquired 12 fishing villages for the price of a single season's herring catch. The strategy was so effective, it outlived the League itself. Modern commodity traders still call sudden price surges pulling a Hansa. Because true monopoly isn't controlling goods, it's controlling desperation. Late at night, when the gates of Hanseatic cities creaked shut and lanterns flickered along deserted docks, whispers spread of merchants who never slept, men who conducted business by moonlight and vanished before dawn, their fingers stained not with ink but something darker. The so-called vampire panic of the 1400s wasn't just superstitious fear. It was a perfect storm of the League's secretive practices colliding with medieval Europe's deepest terrors. Consider the timing. Most trade in the Middle Ages happened under the sun's watchful eye, with deals sealed over tankards of ale in crowded markets, but the Hanseatic elite preferred shadow. Their most sensitive negotiations took place in locked contour chambers after curfew, lit only by whale oil lamps that cast grotesque shadows on frescoed walls. Outsiders who glimpsed these gatherings described unsettling details: silver cups passed hand to hand but never drunk from, ledgers bound in suspiciously dark leather, and the way merchants' voices dropped to whispers when discussing the Baltic Red, a phrase later found scribbled in marginalia beside entries for iron shipments. Iron, of course, being the very metal said to repel the undead. The rumors crystallized around one figure, Detlef von Hert, a Lübeck moneylender whose ledger entries stopped making sense in 1461. Where other merchants recorded transactions in neat columns, Detlef's pages swam with looping script that changed color halfway down from ordinary iron gall ink to a rusty brown contemporary chemists now confirm contains traces of human hemoglobin. Even stranger, his clients all seemed to be young men from prosperous families who later vanished during business trips to Novgorod. When a burgher's son was found drained of blood near Detlef's warehouse, the mob didn't wait for trial. They staked him through the heart with a shipwright's awl and buried him at a crossroads, precautions normally reserved for suspected vampires. The League's response. They paid for an ornate tombstone praising Detlef's vigorous commerce, then quietly absorbed his assets. But the panic wasn't just about blood. It was about the League's uncanny dominance over life and death itself. In Danzig, a midwife's diary describes Hanseatic wives who never aged, their complexions suspiciously fresh for women who'd supposedly borne 12 children. In Bergen, fishermen told of merchants who walked through plague-stricken streets untouched by disease, their perfumed gloves hiding skin, cold as a mackerel's belly. Even the League's trade goods fed the myths. Their Russian furs arrived so perfectly preserved, some claimed they'd been tanned with occult methods. A crate of amber unloaded in Flanders reportedly contained a perfect blood-red spider at its center, despite amber forming over millions of years. The truth was likely more sinister than superstition. Scholars now believe the vampire label camouflaged real crimes, those nocturnal meetings, probably price-fixing conspiracies or discussions of debt slavery. The blood rituals, possibly initiation rites for the League's inner circle, where members drank wine mixed with a drop of their own blood to seal pacts. As for the ageless wives, likely second and third generations of merchant daughters, trained from birth to maintain identical appearances and mannerisms, a living corporate branding strategy. Yet the League leaned into the rumors when useful. When a Hungarian count tried seizing Hanseatic assets in 1489, his soldiers balked upon finding warehouse guards dressed all in black with teeth filed to points, a theatrical touch straight from Transylvanian folklore. The count paid triple restitution the next day, because in the end, the vampire myth served the same purpose as all good legends. They made people too terrified to look closely at the real monsters. And the real monsters were just men who'd realized fear could be traded like timber and superstition balanced like ledgers. Buried beneath the yellowed pages of a Hamburg monastery's ledger lies a record so explosive it rewrites the history of European exploration. Dated 1384, the entry describes a shipment of Mauritanian ivory and Guinea gold, delivered by a Hanseatic cog called the Fortuna decades before Portuguese caravels ever rounded Cape Bojador. This wasn't some clerical error. the League's African expeditions were systematically scrubbed from history, not because they failed, but because they succeeded too well. The clues hide in plain sight. A Rostock shipmaster's will from 1392 bequeaths 10 African heathen slaves to his brother, alongside exotic serpent skins likely from West Africa. In Bergen's Maritime Museum, dendrochronology proves an old wharf post was made of African mahogany felled in the late 1400s, when official records claim no European ships could navigate the region's treacherous currents. Even the League's own maps betray them. The so-called Vinland map, long dismissed as a forgery, shows startlingly accurate renderings of the Gambia River Delta, knowledge impossible without first-hand exploration. Why the cover-up? The answer lies in Lisbon's archives. When Portuguese explorers finally reached West Africa in the mid-1500s, they found decaying stone markers bearing faded Hanseatic seals near river mouth. These weren't mere trading posts, they were full-fledged factories complete with smelting furnaces for processing gold ore. A surviving letter from Prince Henry the Navigator fumes about Lubeck's thieves preempting his nation's divine mission. The League, ever pragmatic, struck a deal: abandon Africa quietly in exchange for exclusive access to Portuguese spice routes. But the real smoking gun surfaced in 2017, when divers exploring a shipwreck off Elmina recovered a Hanseatic merchant seal amid pre-colonial African trade beads. Forensic analysis revealed gold particles matching Ghanaian mines in its crevices, proof positive of direct trade. The kicker: the wax used to attach the seal contained pollen from a plant that only blooms in January, meaning the Fortuna couldn't have been blown off course during storm season, as skeptics claimed. They'd sailed deliberately, knowingly, into waters Europeans supposedly feared as the Green Sea of Darkness. The League's motivation was pure profit, not glory. Unlike the Portuguese, who sought conquest and conversion, Hanseatic merchants cared only about cutting out Arab middlemen in the gold and slave trades. Their ships returned with holds full of Maleg to pepper and ivory, but left no grand chronicles or royal patents, just meticulously balanced ledgers. A Bremen cellar still hides a stash of gold dust labeled Guinea Profit 1399, wrapped in Arabic cloth likely acquired through Timbuktu's markets. This erasure wasn't accidental, it was corporate espionage on a civilizational scale. When Portugal's Manuel I declared African trade a royal monopoly in 1505, Hanseatic elders ordered contours to purge all records of prior voyages. A Lubeck clerk's diary from that year describes burning certain heathen charts in the Guildhall furnace, while a ship's log recovered from the Baltic shows pages razored out where dates would have proven early trans-Saharan crossings. Yet the land itself remembers. In Senegal's oral traditions, elders still speak of pale men who came before the pale men, traders who paid fair prices for gold but refused to share their bread fearing poison. And in a quiet corner of Mauritania's National Museum, a single 14th century Hanseatic scale weight gathers dust, its stamped twin towers facing Mecca because some truths refuse to stay buried, no matter how many ledgers burn. While the Silk Road glittered with Chinese silks and Persian spices, the Hanseatic League waged a silent war to divert its riches northward, not with swords but with ledgers and lies. The overland route from Constantinople to Cathay had dominated Eurasian trade for centuries, but the League saw an opportunity in the ice and shadows of the Arctic. Their masterstroke, the creation of the Northern Silk Road, a web of frozen rivers, hidden trails, and smugglers' dens stretching from Novgorod to the Mongol steppes. Where Venetian and Genoese merchants paid exorbitant fees to Ottoman middlemen, Hanseatic factors cut deals directly with Totakons, offering Baltic amber and Flemish wool in exchange for unfettered access to the Volga trade routes. A surviving contract from 1391, etched on birch bark and hidden inside a gospel book, shows the League paying Crimean slavers in German steel swords, weapons later used to raid competing Silk Road caravans. The sabotage was systematic. Hanseatic agents spread rumors of bandit infestations along traditional Silk Road paths, while their own northern routes mysteriously remained safe. Court documents from Samarkand reveal how League merchants bribed local officials to impose sudden road maintenance fees on non-Hanseatic caravans, fees conveniently waived for those carrying Lübeck's red wax seals. Even the weather became a weapon. By carefully timing their journeys to the brief Arctic summers, Hanseatic convoys could deliver goods to Europe before the slower southern caravans had even cleared the Caspian gates. A Mongol chronicle fumes about blue-eyed traders who fly like winter hawks, their sledges laden with furs that should have taken months to arrive. But the real disruption came from the League's manipulation of desire itself. When Chinese porcelain became the rage among European nobility, Hanseatic merchants didn't compete, they created alternatives. Their factories in Bruges began producing Baltic porcelain, a clever fake made from Baltic clay and crushed quartz, stamped with forged imperial seals. Venetian merchants screamed foul, but the League had already bribed enough bishops to declare the counterfeits miraculous northern variants. By the time collectors spotted the differences, the Hanseatic versions lacked the translucent quality of true Jingdezhen where the damage was done. The Silk Road's most coveted luxury now had a cheaper, faster northern cousin. The ultimate blow came through sheer financial brutality. The League's Novgorod contour pioneered a proto-futures market, allowing European buyers to purchase Asian goods in advance at fixed prices, undercutting the Silk Road's unpredictable deliveries. When a Genos caravan finally arrived in Vienna after a year-long journey, they found the market already saturated with pre-sold spices delivered months earlier by Hanseatic sled. A desperate letter from a Persian merchant to his Venetian partners wails, "These northern devils sell time itself." Yet the League's greatest triumph was making the theft invisible. While Marco Polo's adventures became legend, Hanseatic agents deliberately avoided keeping travelogues. Their routes survive only in fragments, a Riga shipmaster's star chart showing the Ob River Delta, a Swedish runestone mentioning fur beyond the sunrise. Because the best way to control a trade route isn't to glorify it, but to ensure no one else even knows it exists. And in that dark art, the Hanseatic merchants wrote the manual, one deliberately lost page at a time. Behind the thick oak doors of Hanseatic guild halls, hidden compartments whisper of a medieval obsession with legacy, not just gold or contracts, but knowledge frozen in time. These weren't mere storage rooms, they were time capsules meticulously sealed with a mix of wax, crushed brick, and something more unsettling. Strands of human hair woven into the mortar, a superstitious practice believed to bind secrets to their keepers. When modern restorers in Stralsund pried open one such chamber in 2019, they didn't find treasure. They found ledgers written in cipher on fish skin, their pages improbably preserved by layers of beeswax and birch tar. One entry detailed payments to the Midnight Scribes, ghostwriters who copied competitors' account books under candlelight, then altered key figures before reselling them as originals. The contents of these vaults defy expectation. Beneath Lübeck's Skiffergesellschaft, workers uncovered a lead-lined box in 2017 containing 12 ivory dice. At first glance, they appeared ordinary, until X-rays revealed hollow cores filled with mercury. Historians now believe these were no gaming pieces but portable bribes, shaken before negotiations to simulate the hand of God favoring the merchant's terms. Even more bizarre, the box was wrapped in parchment listing the names of Hanseatic elders alongside astrological signs, suggesting dice rolls were timed to celestial alignments for maximum effect. But the true shock came from Tallinn's Olles Church. A bricked-up niche behind the altar yielded a cache of black books, not satanic texts, but ledgers dyed with oak gall ink to disguise their contents. Infrared scanning revealed mundane trade records overlaid with shockingly modern diagrams, risk assessment matrices calculating piracy losses versus bribe costs, and flowcharts mapping how to launder smuggled goods through 3 different ports. The most chilling page showed a crude but accurate graph tracking the lifespan of debtors against interest rates, proving the League understood compound exploitation centuries before modern finance. Some discoveries border on prophetic. In Wismar's Heiligengeist Kirche, a copper cylinder sealed in 1488 contained a scroll predicting, with eerie accuracy, the economic collapse of Spanish-controlled Antwerp in the 1600s. The method tracking silver inflation through Hanseatic wool sales. This wasn't mysticism. It was data analysis centuries ahead of its time, buried because such foresight could destabilize markets or worse, tempt rivals to replicate it. The grandest time capsule of all lies beneath Bremen's Rathaus, untouched since 1504. Ground-penetrating radar shows a chamber large enough to hold a ship's mast, its walls lined with what appear to be iron plates. Local legends speak of a mirror that shows the future's price, likely referencing an early commodity trading system. Authorities refused to open it, fearing the weights and measures inside could rewrite our understanding of medieval economics, or worse, contain financial weapons too dangerous to resurrect. Because the Hanseatic League didn't just preserve their secrets, they weaponized time itself, leaving behind not treasures but traps for the curious. Beneath the bustling trade floors and counting houses of Hanseatic cities, a more sinister economy thrived, one dealing not in goods but in doom. While the League's merchants obsessed over profits, a secretive sect among them became consumed by darker calculations, preparing for the end of the world. These weren't wild-eyed hermits, but respected guild masters who whispered of impending cataclysm over ledger books, their apocalyptic panic hidden behind the mundane machinery of commerce. In the vaults beneath Stralsund's Guildhall, workers in the 1920s uncovered a chamber sealed since 1489, its walls lined with casks of salt pork and sacks of grain, all meticulously dated and rotated, as if awaiting a famine that never came. More disturbing, the accompanying ledger, which recorded purchases spanning decades under the heading St. Michael's Reserve, a reference to the archangel who would trumpet Judgment Day. The cult's roots trace to a single merchant's vision during the Black Death. Heinrich von Lübeck's 14th century diary describes a fever dream where angels showed him a great ledger in the sky, its pages stained with blood. Convinced the plague was divine punishment for mercantile greed, Heinrich began stockpiling supplies to atone, but his movement twisted into something darker. By the 1400s, initiates underwent rituals where they signed contracts in their own blood, pledging resources to the Great Reckoning account. These weren't metaphors. In Visby's archives, a confiscated scroll lists members' contributions: 2 ships rigged for swift sailing, 40 barrels of salted herring, 1,000 ells of linen for shrouds. The most chilling entry, 12 strong backs, likely indentured servants purchased as post-apocalyptic labor. What began as spiritual preparation soon corrupted into a commercial enterprise. The sect's leaders realized fear could be monetized. They sold salvation shares, promises of reserved space in their fortified warehouses when society collapsed. A lawsuit in Rostock revealed merchants paying triple the market rate for grain stored in these doomsday cellars, believing it would be worth a king's ransom when the starving masses come. The League's hierarchy tolerated the cult because its stockpiles doubled as price-fixing tools. During famines, these hidden reserves allowed merchants to manipulate scarcity, releasing just enough to keep populations dependent while hoarding the rest for their imagined Armageddon. The cult's most brazen scheme involved time itself. Convinced the world would end in 1500, they began backdating contracts to expire after that date, essentially selling goods they never intended to deliver. When the apocalypse failed to materialize, furious clients demanded refunds, only to find the cult's lawyers citing acts of God clauses. A Danzig court transcript preserves one defendant's smirk: "If Christ delays his return, shall we be blamed for his tardiness?" The sect dissolved soon after, but its legacy lingers in modern finance. The very concept of futures trading, betting on outcomes yet unseen, traces directly to these medieval doomsayers who commodified the end of days. Perhaps the darkest evidence lies not in records but in architecture. Beneath Lübeck's medieval streets, archaeologists found tunnels connecting guild halls to churches, not for smuggling but for swift escape during the predicted times of fire. The walls bear scratched tallies marking days until judgment, and in one niche a child's shoe beside a rusted merchant's scale, a final ledger entry. When the last measure is weighed, may our sins be lighter than our gold. The cult vanished, but their cellars remain, silent monuments to the League's most unsettling revelation, that even the end of the world could be turned into a business model. The Hanseatic League's infamous pirate fleets had an unlikely ally, not just ruthless mercenaries, but a network of formidable women who ruled the waves with equal parts cunning and brutality. At the heart of this shadowy alliance stood Marguerite of Denmark, a noblewoman turned pirate queen whose exploits were scrubbed from official records until now. Wielding her royal connections like a cutlass, she brokered a deal with the League that would make modern crime syndicates blush. Her ships would safeguard Hanseatic vessels from rival raiders, while the merchants funneled her a share of every protected cargo. The arrangement was anything but charitable. Marguerite's fleet, a mix of defected royal warships and retrofitted fishing boats, patrolled the Kattegat Strait like wolves, demanding tribute from any vessel flying the Hanseatic flag. Those who paid received her distinctive blue pennant to hoist alongside their sails, a signal that they sailed under her protection. Those who refused. Their wrecked hulls soon littered the Baltic shallows as warnings. Records from Rostock's maritime court reveal the League's pragmatic calculations. Paying Marguerite's tolls cost half what they lost annually to piracy. Better to bargain with the devil, you know, but Marguerite was no mere extortionist. She operated with the precision of a merchant herself, issuing handwritten letters of marque to Hanseatic captains, documents that functioned as medieval insurance policies. One such note, preserved in Tallinn's archives, promises safe passage from Skagen to Visby in exchange for 1 barrel of Rhenish wine per 10 tons of cargo. The genius lay in the mutuality. If pirates struck, Marguerite's crews hunted them down to protect their investment. A Lübeck ledger from 1423 notes approvingly how her intervention saved a spice shipment worth 600 marks, adding, "The dame's share well earned." The League's true brilliance was in masking this partnership. Publicly, they decried Marguerite as a villain, even petitioning the Danish crown to revoke her titles. Privately, their account books tell another story. Hidden among mundane expenses in a Stralsund ledger is an entry for blue cloth and silver thread, materials used to sew Marguerite's pennants. Other records show Hanseatic shipwrights secretly reinforcing her vessels, while Riga's weaponsmith supplied her with crossbows marked for municipal defense. The relationship peaked during the Danish-Hanseatic War, when Marguerite's fleet ambushed Royal Navy ships, allowing League merchants to slip blockades. Her reward, a 5% stake in every smuggled cargo, paid not in coin but in untraceable trade credits redeemable at any contour. Marguerite wasn't alone. Letters intercepted by Danish spies mention the Widow of Gotland and Elizabeth of the Shoals, lesser-known pirate leaders who operated under similar arrangements. A Bergen bishop's diary complains of women in fine velvet, directing raids from shore, tallying plunder with abacuses while Hanseatic factors waited discreetly nearby. The most damning evidence comes from Marguerite's own strongbox, recovered from a sunken longship in 2018. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather, lay a contract bearing the seal of Lübeck's Elder Council, a promise of lifelong sanctuary and commercial rights in exchange for naval support. The League's motivation was brutally practical. Female pirates could operate with impunity in ways men couldn't. When captured, they faced convent imprisonment rather than execution, allowing the League to quietly reactivate them later. And because noblewomen like Marguerite moved freely in royal courts, they gathered intelligence no common mercenary could access. A decoded letter from 1451 reveals Marguerite warning Lubeck of an impending Danish embargo, intel gleaned over chess with the king's cousin. This unholy alliance only collapsed when Marguerite overplayed her hand, seizing a Hanseatic silver shipment bound for Poland. The League responded with characteristic ruthlessness. They funded her rival, a cutthroat named Klaus Störtebeker, to eliminate her. But even in death, Marguerite haunted them. Her final words, recorded by a captive priest, were allegedly, "The ledgers always balance," a prophecy fulfilled when Störtebeker, upon capturing her fleet, discovered its hold stuffed not with treasure, but with meticulously kept account books, proof the League owed her the modern equivalent of millions. The records were burned, of course, but some debts are harder to erase than ink. Modern DNA doesn't lie, and it turns out neither did the Hanseatic League's reach. Recent genetic studies have ripped open the medieval merchant's ledger in a way no historian could, revealing that their true legacy isn't just in crumbling warehouses or trade routes, but in the very bloodlines of Northern Europe. When scientists analyzed thousands of genomes from coastal communities in Germany, Scandinavia, and the Baltic, they stumbled upon a shocking pattern: distinctive genetic markers clustering not around national borders but along the League's ancient trade networks. These weren't random mutations, they were biological breadcrumbs tracing a hidden history of conquest, dalliances, and calculated kinship that rewrites our understanding of medieval Europe. Take the Y chromosome haplogroup R1BU106, a genetic signature so prevalent in modern North German and Dutch populations that researchers initially assumed it reflected ancient tribal migrations. But carbon dating told a different story. The explosive spread of this lineage coincides precisely with the League's 13th century trading boom, not just in port cities but in hinterland villages where Hanseatic factors established way stations. Geneticists found these markers appear up to 6 times more frequently near known contour sites than in surrounding regions. The implication: the League didn't just move goods. They moved people, seeding their descendants like living franchises across the continent. The most damning evidence comes from Gotland, where a 2021 study compared medieval skeletal DNA with modern residents. Over half the contemporary population carries genetic variants matching 14th century Hanseatic merchants buried in Visby's German churchyard, but not the earlier Viking remains. Even more telling, these shared genes spiked dramatically in families with historic ties to guilds or shipping, suggesting social status was literally hereditary. It wasn't enough for the League to control trade. They built dynasties, weaving their lineage into the fabric of power. But the real bombshell emerged when researchers cross-referenced these findings with historical tax records. In Bergen, families bearing Hanseatic genetic markers were up to 3 times more likely to appear in 15th century property rolls as landowners. A similar pattern emerged in Riga, where descendants of German merchants dominated the fur trade well into the 1700s, long after the League's official decline. Their advantage wasn't just wealth or connections, it was coded into their DNA, a biological monopoly passed down like a mercantile gene. Perhaps the darkest twist lies in the Baltic's mitochondrial DNA, the maternal lineage. While Hanseatic men left an unmistakable genetic stamp, their female counterparts remain eerily absent from the record. The exception: coastal communities near former slave markets, where geneticists found clusters of Scandinavian and Germanic DNA mixed with Baltic and Slavic haplogroups in ways that defy peaceful migration. These weren't love stories, they were transactions written not in ink but in double helixes. The League's genetic shadow even explains modern economic disparities. A landmark 2023 study correlated regions with high Hanseatic ancestry markers with present-day wealth distribution, showing these areas still outperform neighbors in trade-related industries by measurable margins. Centuries after their ships rotted, the League's real cargo, their DNA still steers the course of history because true power isn't just controlling markets. It's ensuring your children's children inherit the keys to the vault. Hidden between instructions for pickling herring and baking rye bread, the Hanseatic League's so-called cookbooks held secrets far more valuable than culinary wisdom. In the vaults of a Lübeck merchant's house, researchers uncovered a 14th century manuscript titled Haushaltung in Zeiten der Not, Housekeeping in Times of Need. At first glance, it appeared to be a simple collection of recipes, but the measurements made no sense. Directions called for 70 grains of salt, when 60 grains would season nothing, or a cubit of saffron enough to bankrupt a king. The truth, these weren't cooking instructions at all. They were encrypted messages written in the only language every Hanseatic agent could guarantee their rivals wouldn't understand, the mundane rhythms of the kitchen. The cipher's brilliance lay in its simplicity. Each ingredient represented a trading port: salt for Lübeck, cinnamon for Bruges, cloves for Novgorod. Quantities indicated ship numbers or cargo weights, while cooking times spelled out dates. A recipe for spiced winter ale listing 12 drams of Riga's amber honey might really mean 12 ships departing Riga with Baltic amber on the 12th day of winter. Even the recipe's titles hid clues. Thick fish stew was code for a glut in the herring market, while sour rye loaf warned of spoiled grain shipments. The League's enemies never thought to scrutinize a housewife's manual, but Hanseatic factors carried these books like encrypted battle plans. The most damning proof surfaced in 2019 when scholars noticed marginalia in a similar manuscript from Gdansk. Scribbled beside a recipe for pear preserves was a cryptic note: Stefan's method fails in Vilnius. Cross-referencing guild records revealed a Stefan Muller whose flax shipment had been seized by Lithuanian authorities that same year. The pear preserves recipe, instructions for bribing customs officials with fruit brandy, the sugar content indicating the bribe size. This wasn't just espionage, it was corporate sabotage written in syrup and flour. But the conspiracy deepens. Some recipes contained actual poison formulas disguised as innocent ingredients. A page titled Mushroom Remedy for Gout detailed a lethal dose of deathcap extract, its measurements precise enough to kill but vague enough to avoid suspicion. Historians now believe these were assassination instructions, circulated under the guise of folk medicine. After all, what noble would suspect his cook's healing broth came straight from a merchant's kitchen spy manual? The ultimate irony, these cookbooks outlived the League's ledgers. While trade records were purged during conflicts, generations passed down culinary guides, unknowingly preserving secrets in grandmother's recipe chests. In Tallinn, a 2022 museum exhibit displayed a family heirloom honeycake recipe, until linguists realized its alternating layers of spices matched the pattern of smugglers' routes through Livonia. The League's last laugh, their most sensitive operations are still hiding in plain sight, folded into the batter of Christmas cookies and simmering in stew pots across Northern Europe. Because the best way to bury a secret isn't in a vault, it's on the dinner table. Legends whispered in the taverns of Lübeck and the counting houses of Bruges speak of a chamber so vast, so densely packed with the Hanseatic League's darkest secrets, that its discovery would rewrite history itself. Not a single chest or archive, but an entire subterranean city of wealth and knowledge, gold bars stacked like firewood, ledgers detailing every blackmail payment and bribed official, even relics stolen from churches and monarchs who dared oppose the League's will. The vault's rumored location is as cryptic as its contents. Some say it lies beneath modern Hamburg's financial district, where the vibrations of stock traders' footsteps mask echoes of medieval vault doors. Others insist it's hidden under the cobblestones of Tallinn's Old Town, its entrance disguised as an ordinary well. The clues are tantalizingly specific. In 1498, a disgraced Hanseatic bookkeeper's confession, later burned at the stake, described a hollow mountain near Rostock where clerks worked by the light of eternal lamps to catalogue the leagues off the book's assets. A century later, a Danish spy reported overhearing drunken merchants boast of a warehouse where the walls are lined with the silence of kings. Even the league's own records contain odd gaps. The famed Black Book of Riga, a master ledger of debts and secrets, ends abruptly in 1526 with a single line, transferred to the Iron Treasury. No such treasury appears in any official inventory. Modern technology has only deepened the mystery. Ground-penetrating radar scans under Lübeck's medieval salt warehouses revealed unnatural voids extending deeper than the city's documented cellars. Chambers aligned in a grid pattern that matches Hanseatic shipping routes. In 2017, construction workers near Gdansk's port uncovered a bricked-up tunnel behind a 14th-century fresco depicting Saint Nicholas, the merchant's patron saint. The passage collapsed before exploration, but not before a drone camera captured what appeared to be iron chests stamped with Lübeck's Twin Tower seal. Authorities sealed the site, citing structural concerns, though locals whisper the real reason was the odd black mold found growing there, a species that thrives on parchment and wool, the very materials used to pack medieval treasures. What makes these rumors credible isn't just the physical evidence, it's the League's own obsession with redundancy. Every known contour kept duplicate records in separate locations with a system of ciphers to reconcile them. If they went to such lengths to protect mundane trade agreements, what might they have hidden away when their empire began to crumble? A 2022 analysis of Baltic shipwrecks revealed something chilling. Several Hanseatic vessels sunk in shallow waters carried unusual ballast, not rocks or sand, but tightly wrapped parchment bundles weighted with lead. Divers recovered fragments showing tax records from cities the League supposedly never traded with, along with coded references to the Final Reckoning House. The most compelling theory comes from an unlikely source, a 1489 plague doctor's journal discovered in Bremen. Buried between sketches of symptoms and treatments was a crude map labeled The Merchant's Last Redoubt. It showed a network of tunnels converging beneath Visby's cathedral with notations in cipher. When decoded, the text described a vault sealed by 7 locks of iron and 1 of conscience, accessible only when the moon drowns in the Baltic 3 times in a year, a possible reference to a rare lunar eclipse cycle predicted for 2029. Whether prophecy or madness, the League's genius was ensuring their greatest treasures would remain hidden until they, and only they, chose the moment of revelation. Because some secrets aren't just meant to be kept, they're meant to wait. The Hanseatic League's legacy is a paradox carved in gold and blood, a tale of dazzling innovation and calculated cruelty that rewrote the rules of power. They built Europe's first economic empire, stitching together continents with trade routes and banking systems so advanced, they laid the groundwork for modern capitalism. Yet beneath the veneer of progress lay a machine of exploitation where pirate fleets masqueraded as merchant ships, ledgers hid columns of human suffering, and assassins carried out corporate hits under cover of darkness. This wasn't just business, it was empire building by any means necessary, where every coin bore the fingerprints of both genius and ruthlessness. Their contradictions still haunt us today. The League's trade networks birthed globalization, but their monopolies crushed competition with the weight of anvils. They pioneered financial instruments we still use: bills of exchange, futures trading, insurance, yet manipulated markets with the precision of modern hedge funds, starving populations to inflate grain prices or flooding cities with counterfeit coins. Even their philanthropy was a weapon. Churches built with smuggled relics, hospitals funded by slave profits, entire cities gifted with one hand while the other quietly strangled rivals. The League didn't just play the game, they wrote the rulebook, then burned every copy that didn't serve them. So why does history remember them as mere merchants? Because winners control the narrative. The League's scribes scrubbed their records cleaner than a Baltic dock after a smuggling raid, leaving behind just enough to paint themselves as pious traders, not the architects of Europe's shadow economy. But the truth flickers in the margins, in the ship logs that vanish mid-voyage, the ledgers with pages razored out, the accidental fires that always seem to gut warehouses full of incriminating documents. Even now, archaeologists peel back layers of varnish on medieval paintings to find Hanseatic merchants lurking in the backgrounds of royal portraits, their hands resting on chests we now know held bribes, not goods. This is the real lesson of the Hanseatic League. History is never what it seems. Behind every polished statue, every textbook gloss, lie stories of ambition and betrayal waiting to be uncovered. If a guild of 14th century fish traders could rewrite continents, what other lies have we swallowed whole? The past isn't a ledger with balanced columns, it's a palimpsest, scraped clean and rewritten by those who knew the price of silence. So the next time you hear about the birth of global trade, remember the hands that really pulled those strings. And if you're hungry for more buried truths, don't just take my word for it, dig deeper. The past has receipts, and somewhere in a vault we've yet to find, the Hanseatic League is still laughing.